This has been quite the journey, but it's well worth it when considering the value of the volunteer to donor pipeline. In fact, I would say that it is probably one of the most valuable untapped resources. There is no caveat on that. That is full stop. We estimate that it's worth about $50 billion in the US alone. And we've been working with a few products to unlock this opportunity, but I have to first give another nod to Gung and Civic Champs. Our goal is to work with existing systems, and there are several collaborators in this space that are really looking to rise the tide for the sector. And Gung, you are certainly one of them. So thank you for that. So I'd like to jump right in and share some foundational research. These are things that we think about when designing features to inspire more generosity. One data point that I think about more than any other is that 8 out of 10 volunteers are likely donors. You've probably heard the statistic. But why does this 80% conversion rate seem so out of reach? And imagine if you had a store, an online store, brick and mortar, and 8 out of 10 of your visitors were likely to buy something from you, that would be the most desirable business in history. And so, there's this weird dynamic gap there. And there are a few psychological inputs and ways of inspiring behavior that could make this more approachable. And so I'm going to share some of that, and then I'll share some tools that we've developed, based on giving behavior. So first, let's get into social norms. You may have heard the term social proof. People align their actions and beliefs with other people's beliefs, particularly in uncertain situations. And the power of this influence is actually part of the origin story around Kindly. When we first started doing field research, I would actually volunteer with pilot partners. Some of these partners are actually on the call, so hello and thank you for being part of this long journey. And I would volunteer with these pilot partners, and some of these were group events. However, I was just a random solo volunteer. And at these events, there would often be a debrief at the end where we would celebrate the day's impact, and a staff member would make a financial appeal. And half jokingly, I would turn to whoever's sitting next to me and say, "I'll donate $20 if you donate $20." And I probably did this maybe 10 or 15 times. This is at the very, very beginning of like building Kindly and researching. And I would say that hardly anyone turned me down on this. And so this was a major experience for me, and really the beginning of what got me so excited in the potential that is just like right underneath the surface. The people just need to be asked, and they need to be asked in the right way with the right behavior levers in play. Social norms is one of those. Identity is another big one, and this is pretty simple. It's like reminding your husband or wife or partner that they're a great cook, to get them to cook more. So, we've all done this in some way as we try to charm our way into what we want, but, reminding donors of who they are can be a powerful motivator. And there's a study that I actually nerd out to and share a lot, because the results are so pronounced. And it's that researchers identified 80 potential donors where half the people being solicited, these potential donors, they made sure that the name on their name badge matched the name of the potential donor, as they were making the ask. And it was crazy because on average, those with matching names gave twice as much. So obviously can't replicate that. You can't have someone sitting at the bench at every session asking to personally match, and you can't necessarily match gungs with gungs. I only know one gung. But that said, these sort of identity levers are really, really powerful in the donation solicitation process. And timing is a major, major influence, especially in the volunteer to donor pipeline. In many cases, the volunteers are right in front of you, and they just completed work to support your mission and vision, and their hearts are open really wide, and you need to thread that needle. This does not work by sending MailChimp emails out, later on in the day. We don't have to actually point to any outside research here because we've been able to test our own ideas in partnership with VMSs on delivering appeals connected to the event end time. And we have a pretty big number to share on that. On-site donations are 265% more valuable. So just think about that for a second. There's that moment that when the volunteers are most endeared to the organization, and we need to thread that needle. Kindly's communication funnel sent messages just before the event end time and also some reminders after the event. And we were able to pull volunteers back into the donation funnel after the event, but donations made before the volunteer starts driving away, that is definitely the sweet spot. And it makes sense, right? Because volunteer professionals need an easier way to make this happen, but it's a fleeting moment, and it's not easy to capture that moment. And there's a lot of anxiety and suspense around making the ask. And so we've all been there, but simply asking for support isn't always enough. So we need to design a way, or a couple ways to take advantage of this moment and thinking about giving behavior. Um, and where we arrived, and this is, really important, and there's a feature here that I'm going to share in a little bit, but in the moment, donation matching challenges turned out to be a bit of a silver bullet for us. It was sort of like me being able to whisper, delivering a message to the volunteer, and like as I whisper to them on the bench, I'll give $20 if you do. Taking advantage of that moment and that connection between people and having it delivered at the right time significantly transform the volunteer to donor conversion. I'll unpack where the matching comes from in a bit, but um, knowing that nearly all donors want a deeper connection to their giving, and data suggests somewhere around 94% want that deeper connection. Let's give them that connection, not only through the programmatic activity that they're doing, but also through a matching fund, connecting donors to volunteers, inspiring more donations. And it sets up this virtuous cycle where donors are training volunteers to be the next donors. And, this is just one version of the message that we send out to volunteers about 15 minutes before the end of the event. And we're using some of those behavior levers as we discussed. So in this scenario, sending out that message again, we're sort of like the wingman for the volunteer coordinator or point person, and celebrating that, I have unlocked money, a donor is ready to boost my impact. And anything I give today, funds will be added to. And depending on the carrier settings, we also send this fun little graphic saying meet your match. This is social, this is sparking curiosity, and it also tees up a little bit of gamification, which I'm about to share in this demo here. So also, if there are questions, Gung, if you see them floating through, feel free to interrupt me in this process. But let me stop sharing for a second and then reshare my screen with a demo. 1 second.
Yeah, we'll do. I'll I'm monitoring. So far we're good.
Okie dokie. All right. So we want to make donating addictive. We want to make it super fun. We want to make it socially connected. We also want, volunteer coordinators and point people to be able to, reduce that anxiety and suspense around making the ask by saying, hey, everyone, check out your phones. There's a message waiting for you where, someone just like you, again, behavior lever, is, willing to top off anything you give with, a match. So we engage the volunteer through the link. Each link that we're sending when connected to the volunteer management system is actually personalized. So we are able to track the individual's navigation through the link, which is really great insight to understand who's paying attention at what moment. So I'm going to go ahead and click get matched here. Now, if you're in the Twin Cities, or there's a few other metros, the Chicago area, you may be familiar with Feed My Starving Children. They've been an incredible partner. They are a fire hose of volunteer activities, hundreds of thousands of unique volunteers a year. And we worked with their system to send messages through push notification, text messages, and emails. So we're seeing here what their screen looks like. They have a giving level of $106, feeds a kid for a year. Now, we're teasing volunteers to get into the donation pipeline. There's still a bit of curiosity about what this match is about. But what we found, and what is super customary in the space, is that we're so used to hearing about one-to-one matches and or even like you give $20, someone will add $40. And what we found, especially in the volunteer conversation, is that's not actually optimized. People just needed to be nudged and recognized into the donation pipeline because, again, they are already likely donors. So the volunteer sees these milestones, and for Feed My Starving Children, a key milestone for them is $106 feeds a kid for a year. And this is when it gets, oh, there's also something on the bottom here where I could put in, $20 and that's 69 meals. So there's some customization there. But let's go back to the 106 and feed a kid for a year. And this is where it gets fun about matching volunteers to donors in the moment. Now, remember, there's a donor here who's created a fund. I'll share what that experience looks like. But these are existing donors that, volunteers are unlocking little bite-sized nuggets of their fund. And we're using that leverage to inspire volunteers into the donation funnel. And so the volunteer gets to spin a wheel. We'll be correlating success on this feature based on compulsive gambling habits because you can go back and respin. I got matched to Whitney, a real donor, and she is going to add $20 on top of my $106. As customary with all giving platforms, there is the opportunity to cover payment processing. Over 85% of people leave that checked. I'm going to go ahead and donate 110.35. Now, if we're sending this in connection with the VMS, like Civic Champs, this data is already filled because we already know who's engaging. Now, oftentimes there are QR codes peppered around the volunteer event. So that's another way to get in case you didn't get a message. And important is that this is not a downloadable app. This is actually a progressive web app. This is accessible via website. I'm actually accessing it from my desktop right now. So it's super easy, doesn't require any downloading. I'm going to continue to payment. And we have all the customary payment methods. I'm going to put in a dummy account here. And oops, says donate $0. That is not the amount that we're donating. Oh, live demos. We love that. Um, well, this is actually, oh, I'm not using the, silly me, I'm actually using I'm not using the staging site. That's my bad. Sorry about that. The reason why it didn't work is because the credit card wasn't accepted, and that was actually the live account there. This would be the same process here moving through. Anyway, when the donation does get processed, a receipt is, hey, I got $23, even better. When the donation is processed, an automatic receipt is sent. And in that moment, there's also recognition of how much the volunteer donated and how much was added to the donation. But one of the really fun parts when looking at how volunteers are actually being inspired by donors, we set up these matching accounts for donors to, input the organizations they want to support, a few other data points, and then their account is up and running. So this donor, Kyle B, has donated over $5,000 into his account. And the story that we get to share with Kyle is that, Kyle's been matched to over 245 volunteers. He's just about at the end of his fund. And what we have seen is that Kyle and others are also compulsively donating. Kyle opened up his account for $1,000 back in March. Right now, we don't have a recurring button set for donation. So this is all manually being added to the fund. We send a notification when the account gets to zero. And Kyle's been very, very active with re-upping his fund because Kyle is seeing volunteers in real time, unlocking his fund. And we could celebrate to Kyle that nearly $5,000 was matched with 245 volunteers. And those volunteers added $17,541. So Kyle spent $5,000 to receive almost $22,528 of impact. And this is an exciting proposition for donors. And as the account gets to zero, it'll be triggered shortly here because his account will get to zero. We'll be sharing with Kyle to say, hey, let's keep this energy going. This is exciting. And the army of volunteers are waiting for you. We also could see all the transactions. You could see the first name and last initial of everyone who's matching him.
And Brandon, this is an actual real example.
This is a real example. This is actually a real example.
Awesome. And Deborah had a question too. She said, is this available in Canada?
We're actually working with a few VMS partners that are focused in Canada, and we will be releasing in Canada, maybe even as soon as Q4.
Awesome, awesome. And Civic Champs also supports Canada, US and Canada. So once that's ready, Deborah, you'll be in good hands.
Fantastic. Let me share one more thing because the excitement in donating isn't just on the fun side. We could we could share and get it, we could get share with volunteers the excitement of unlocking money in the moment. And I'd like to share Jerry. Jerry's actually a real donor, though I swapped out his photo for Jerry Dwyer here. I think we all know what he's screaming into the phone right there. So Jerry had a baseline in 2022 when we started previously, before Kindly was working with the nonprofit that Jerry supports. And Jerry gave in the year before 4 gifts for $429. And as we started to, and I'm going to share data from 2023, and you'll see a little bit from 2024 there. But it was as Jerry started to engage with the Kindly donation process. And this is Jerry's behavior now. We'll just let this scroll out here. Now, Jerry is giving multiple times a week at the end of the session. Jerry is really excited about unlocking money and being matched to someone. And so we turned Jerry's donation habits into something that looked more quarterly at the $100 level or so, to donating over 98 times out of the gate in the first year. And we rose this amount of contribution revenue to $2,251. And so, the idea here is, how can we make donating super fun, super engaging, using these behavior levers to inspire the giving process? And I'm excited to share that Jerry has continued to donate at this level because he likes unlocking money. He likes being matched to other like-minded people and feeling recognized. There's another thing that I forgot to share, and it actually relates to the psychology on our donation funnel as well, is that as you're donating and unlocking money, and that unlocking is connected to work that you did, you were on site maybe, and you spent time there, maybe building a house for a habitat or feeding people in need of a meal. And because you're unlocking that money because of your service, there's this interesting psychological play here where, like, I've earned that match. And loss aversion is extremely valuable as a lever. People do not like losing things they have earned. So by positioning this opportunity as a match among like-minded people, and then that's been earned through the volunteer experience, we see a significant reduction in normal cart abandonment in the donation funnel. And we have to defend on this process in many different ways because there's so many different distractions. And we know that if we capture that interest on site, it's 265% more valuable. So that was the last of the slides. I'm really excited to make donating addictive.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's every time, this is not the first time I've seen those numbers, as Brandley sort of has shared that with me, but I'm just so impressed every time. Those numbers are just really incredible, and sort of the fact that they're real makes it even more exciting, right? It's not just a made up potential example, but actual behavior from real people. So building off of kind of Brandon's sort of example here with Kindly, I thought it'd also be helpful just to broaden the scope a little bit here, right? So, the title of today's presentation was around beyond fundraising. And so certainly there is a huge, huge opportunity here in terms of kind of converting or, volunteers to donors, especially through, what Kindly is doing here. But in addition to that, right, like I think we can broadly think about how can nonprofit organizations better leverage your volunteer program generically to increase revenues, right? And so I'll share 3 additional examples, more for food for thought. Some of these might be more applicable, and I wanted to share kind of a range so that you might say, hey, maybe we could do something like this too, right? And so the first example I have is just event-based fundraising. And some of these you might say, oh, actually, I've heard of this. I know this, right? But oftentimes I feel like sometimes there's a disconnect between the volunteer program and the revenues that it's actually generating. And so if you think about one example here, this is a women's build. This is the Habitat for Humanity of Greater Fort Wayne. You can find this on their website. They're celebrating this. And so if you're not aware, Habitat for Humanity, they build homes in communities, and a lot of habitats will have what they call women build. So it's a build a construction project that is sort of funded by women and sort of led by women in terms of getting the whole house built, right? And so um, they I forget, I think this is last year, right? They raised $42,644 through their Women Build initiative, right? Just, they said, hey, we're going to build this house. And it's kind of a peer-to-peer campaign. And so, these women would sign up to volunteer to be, to help with the construction of this home. But in addition to that, they're also often committing to fundraising as part of that process, right? And so obviously, if you can take off $42,000 from the cost of a house plus the labor that comes from the volunteering, right, that really makes the housing much more affordable, right? And so just kind of an interesting way, right? They're all volunteers. None of these are staff members. It's not completely free. You do have to have some staff to kind of help facilitate and sort of manage this project, right? But this is a great way to grow your program, right? Another example that's more nationwide, and so you might see this around the Super Bowl time, right? It's called Super Bowl of Caring, right? With soup, play on words there, but every year during the Super Bowl, uh, tons of organizations get together to tackle hunger, right? And it's a very similar program where you have kind of peer-to-peer support. You can get together as a company. You can support it as as a nonprofit, right? But as a way to kind of leverage your network, right? And the fact that they have sort of like this event impact means that from a psychology standpoint, to Brandon's point, right, you have this identity, right? Like it's not just me, we are all kind of doing this. There's like the social component as well, right? And so I think that's another kind of interesting example. Um, Here again, some of you may already be aware of this, but employers have volunteer grants, right? So you can grow your volunteer program specifically with certain employers. You're able to leverage their sort of dollars for doers programs. And so here's kind of just a short list of different organizations that have these programs. You can find, we have an article here that we'll share out as well. You can click through to read more. Each of these, we actually linked to the specific programs, but this is pretty substantial, right? So every Starbucks employee, if they volunteer with a nonprofit, they can get $5 per hour's match. That Starbucks will donate back to that nonprofit. They have to fill out a little form. They have oftentimes there's a minimum requirement and maximum, right? So as long as they've volunteered for 5 hours, you'll get $25, right? And that's just them volunteering and submitting a form. It's a great way for your volunteers to feel like, again, kind of like that matching impact that Brandon talked about, right? You can do this by saying, hey, did you know your company would actually donate, right? So it's another way to think about retention as well. Imagine, I'm going to say here, Verizon as an example, right? They have a minimum of 50 hours of volunteering that's required for, they want someone that says, hey, I'm really dedicated to this cause, and Verizon will donate. Imagine you have somebody that's done 25 hours, 30 hours, right? And you could say, hey, did you know, because you're a Verizon employee, if you do another 25 hours, Verizon is going to write will write a $750 grant to our organization, right? What a great motivator for someone to say, yeah, actually, that's awesome. Let me come back, and help you sort of get that grant. And so lots and lots of programs. Most of these organizations are going to be sort of national corporations. And then some of your larger regionals are going to have programs like this as well. So think about your bigger or bigger companies in your community, and you can see if they have programs like this. I'll give a shout out to Double the Donation. They're another kind of technology company out there. They actually have a database of all these companies that have these programs, so I would give them a look as well. Right. Third example here, a couple different logos. And so My Sister's Closet was actually Civic Champ's very first pilot, along with a Habitat for Humanity in Bloomington, Indiana. And so they are a thrift shop. And so a lot of times we don't think about this, but thrift shops, a huge percentage of sort of their labor or their day-to-day operations is kind of manned by volunteers, right? And these volunteers are generating revenue because that's how you get the sales out of the store, right? So if you can launch a program where volunteers are able to kind of programmatically generate revenue, that's another way to drive sort of increased revenue for your organization. Similarly, Habitat for Humanity has restores, very similar. It's a kind of a thrift shop, except for more construction oriented items, right? And then the Indiana Historical Society, right? They have docents, they have tour guides, you have to spend time to train them, of course, right? So there is some cost there, but they sell tickets for these tours, right? So you and I, we can go and say, hey, you know what? I'd love to do a historical tour of XYZ neighborhood. They say, hey, that's awesome. We have these tours. It's every Saturday, Sunday, whatever it is. They're $25 for the tour. You can buy a package, et cetera, et cetera. But those programs are often run by volunteers, right? So the volunteers are doing the tours, they're providing the explanations, they're passionate about their community, they like to learn. But it's another way to drive revenue for your organization, right? And then the YMCA, you're like, well, how do they do it? Well, if you're like me, like I said, I have kids. And so they do a lot of different sports. They sign up for different programs. The YMCA, like many of these sort of youth focused organizations, they charge, right? For, if you want to do soccer lessons or you want to do XYZ league, right? There's a fee for that. But a lot of the coaching, right? A lot of the day-to-day is actually managed by volunteers, right? And so if you can have a program like that again, where your volunteers are programmatically generating revenue, that's kind of an interesting way. And I think my big push is also you should give credit to the volunteer program for that revenue that's getting brought in, right? I think a lot of times when we look at volunteer programs, they might do the work, but they don't get the credit for that work, right? And so thinking about how we allocate resources and revenue and such, right? So thinking about that. Great. So those are three examples. Hopefully that's kind of good food for thought. Um, Real quickly, just while I have you all, if you don't know about Civic Champs, obviously we work with Kindly and what they do. So, we're a volunteer management platform, and so we're known for a couple things. Here we're kind of best value, best ease of use are kind of our two main areas. The first just means that we're underpriced, which it's kind of an ironic badge. But what we help you do is we help you, every step of the way from recruiting to onboarding to scheduling, engaging, retention, and reporting. We have a mobile app, right? For example, to make check-ins really easy. We also have a kiosk, lots of different ways to do check-ins. But this is kind of a more novel way to do it. We collect feedback from your volunteers to help you with retention. And then we make reporting super, super easy, right? So just real quickly, a little spiel. I feel inclined to share that whenever we have new folks here, right? And then we integrate with a number of partners, Kindly, of course, but also some of our CRM buddies, Little Green Light and Blackbaud, Razor's Edge, NXT. And if you want to learn more, here's kind of my contact information. And so you can, feel free to reach out to us. Here's Brandon was kind enough to share his, pun intended. But yeah, I'll sort of leave it here.